Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Hi, welcome back to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. I'm your host, Jen Shirkani, and today we're going to look at an ego trap 3. It's called surrounding yourself with more of you. We, in our prior episodes, talked about traps 1 and 2. If you're interested, go back and take a listen at what those two are. But to start, let me do a quick definition here of emotional intelligence, which is what the whole episode is about, which is the ability to understand yourself, recognizing who you are, your strengths and weaknesses, and your personality type, your moods, and how your moods affect you, your ability to read others and understand what's going on for them, read the room, as it were, and then respond appropriately and be mindful in choosing how you react to things based on that person or situation you're in, instead of letting your emotion take over or letting impulse drive the way you react. So I've invited 2 co-hosts to join me today. I'm joined by Steve Friedlein. Hi, Steve. And Angela Bearor. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having us today.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about this topic of surrounding yourself with more of you. I mean, you know, it doesn't get better than just more of me, right?
Oh, boy.
But I think we run the risk of groupthink when we've got too much of the same.
Excellent point, Jen. So I just wanted to take a minute and talk about groupthink just for a moment. And then I have a couple of poll questions for you and Steve to answer.
Okay.
So the term groupthink was actually coined by a gentleman named William H. White. He was a writer for Fortune magazine, and this goes all the way back to 1952. And it's basically a philosophy that holds that group values are practical, right, and good. Okay? So you're putting the group values above anything else, any dissent, anything. Correct. All right, now keeping that in mind, here's your first question. Which national disaster was groupthink not cited to be a major contributing factor? Okay, here are your choices.
Okay.
The Great Depression, the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, or the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Okay.
No softballs today, guys.
Jeez, I'll say.
Okay.
This is a hard one.
There's no money involved here, right?
No.
Okay, good.
Good thing. Well, I was only alive for one of them. And I remember the Challenger one very specifically. But I'm pretty sure groupthink played a role in that, as I recall. And the other 3 were Pearl Harbor, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression and the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Steve?
I'm kind of going with the Challenger.
Are you?
I think so.
Jen, final answer?
Oh, gosh. I know the Great Depression had to do with the stock market, so I think groupthink did play a role in that. I don't know. I'm going to say Bay of Pigs.
It was actually the Great Depression.
Oh,
believe it or not.
really?
That was my first instinct, and then I thought,
But didn't groupthink play a role in everyone selling out their stocks?
Yes.
I mean, didn't the market crash?
That's not what put the everything in action.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's right.
It was. Yes.
Okay.
Good
So
question.
the space shuttle, the Challenger, was the idea that the O-rings were safe, even though they had problems in the past and they were ignored. But the interesting thing when I was researching that particular incident was that they were because the O-rings had always been faulty in the past. They had received similar errors. And because there had never been a disaster in the past, they chalked it up to, it's going to be okay. This always happens. So instead of trying to prove that it was a safe event to continue with these O-rings. They were trying to prove that it was unsafe. And because there were no safety incursions the other several times that it had happened with these O-rings, then they got a pass for the Challenger.
Okay.
So very interesting. These are big problems, obviously, right? These are big disasters.
Yeah.
That could have possibly been avoided
Okay.
for some, dissenters. All right, next question. Which of the following is a negative outcome of groupthink? Okay, we already know all those disasters are negative outcomes, but let's go to traits or consequences.
Okay.
First one is the illusion of invulnerability, poor decision making, lack of creativity and innovation, or all of the above.
What was the first one again?
The illusion of invulnerability.
I think all of the above.
All of them. I would agree.
Oh,
yes.
We
got
thank goodness.
We're a 50-50 here.
Maybe we can go on a game show.
Yeah, well, we better brush up a lot.
Okay.
No, that is interesting. We do see all of those consequences, on teams routinely happen. And it makes a lot of sense because a group of people who may look different but think alike is not helpful.
Right.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned, Jen, I think in a previous episode that problem-solving skills with regard to IQ are going down, have gone down. And one of the biggest byproducts of this group think is lack of problem solving as well. Lack of
not enough critical thinking.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I think group think can kind of sneak up on us, especially as we're building a team in an organization or you're bringing a group of people together. You find yourself being in that situation where you're starting to think alike, but don't necessarily attribute it to the fact, for example, in the workplace, that maybe we need to be a little more open-minded when we go through the interviewing process. How do we bring in other personality types or people that communicate a little differently from us? Generational differences might play into the reason that we're all thinking alike. But I do think that groupthink thing sneaks up on us, actually, sometimes.
I agree. I'm thinking of communication style, Steve.
Yes, absolutely. Are we comfortable bringing someone into the team that's very outspoken and has a lot of creative ideas that they want to throw into the mix, if we tend to sit back and move forward a little more slowly in terms of our team processes?
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of one of the clients that we've had who had a routine process of giving everybody communication style assessments. So after they'd worked at the firm for 6 months, they would give them the EQ or the person. I'm blowing it here. After they worked for the firm for 6 months, they would give them all a communication style profile to take. And we started to notice a trend where 80% of their employees were falling on one side of one of the metrics. And despite having to raise their awareness of it and work with the recruiters on it, I can't help but think there was some type of hiring bias happening.
Exactly. And the interesting thing, if I remember correctly, Jen, is even when this organization became aware of the fact that they were getting into this communication style situation where a lot of people had the same style, they were still finding it difficult to bring people into the group that didn't share their style. Even when they had the awareness, when it came down to the interviewing process, they were unwilling to venture out into scary territory, if you want to call it that.
So I have a question for both of you. If I am a hiring manager and my job is to hire for fit, what does that look like? How do I hire for fit but still avoid groupthink?
It's really interesting because the assumption is, for example, that if I'm an accountant, I must be analytical, right? If I'm
Mhm.
in the creative arts, I must be expressive. I must,
Mhm.
be an actor in terms of the way I communicate. And case in point, I actually went through this communication style process in a group of CPAs, accountants, and they all assumed that they were going to be analytical. They were all over the board. What you do for a vocation does not necessarily indicate what your style is going to be.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Angela. There's a lot of people who hire for quote unquote fit because they're looking for people that will match the company culture and the values and the behaviors. And the challenge is you really can start to get a lot of the same in an organization when you do that. So you have to consider, how do we interview people with diverse backgrounds and experiences and diverse communication styles and generations, but still can get to consensus with others effectively? It doesn't mean we're always going to agree on everything. It doesn't mean we're always going to have the same thoughts, but can we at least share those thoughts? And I think one of the challenges we all face is that what they call psychological safety. Do we feel safe to be candid? If everybody is saying this is a good idea, back to the O-ring idea, right? If everyone is saying this is going to work, do I have the bravery and the courage to be the one person who says, wait a second, I'm not okay
Yes.
with this yet?
Right. And it's one thing to say it's a safe environment. It's another thing entirely for the environment to be safe. Okay. We may say these are our values and we want you to speak up and we want you to bring about viewpoints that are inconsistent with what you're hearing in the rest of the room. But how we react when someone does that will determine whether or not we continue to get that kind of information from the people we so want to hear from.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all seen and been a part of those meetings with everyone in the conference room that are dragging on and have multiple items on the agenda. And something that I might not agree with, or you or Jen, you just let it slide by because you don't want to take up more time. Everybody's trying to get out of there. It's kind of like, well, why you don't want to be that one to hold up the process.
Exactly. Yes.
And I think people get labeled too.
Yeah.
They're the
Absolutely.
naysayer. They're the negative person. They're the one who's always stopping everything or questioning everything.
Yeah.
So it discourages that behavior.
Another thing that I think plays in here is the way we respond to change. Okay. In terms of surrounding ourselves with people we're comfortable with, some people like to take their time and have incremental change going on. Other people like to go with the big guns and let's throw that out and try something new. And I think that's also an aspect of what happens where groupthink is concerned. Are we willing to open ourselves up to people who like to go about dealing with change differently from the way I do or we do?
It's a balance. We need to have both because, we can't spend, depending on how big the decision is, I guess, hours and hours and hours and hours debating something that never has a resolution, because we've seen that too, where decisions just don't get made because they can't figure out how to get to consensus. But on the other hand, if decisions are being made too quickly, if meetings are nice and short, it means you may need to take a hard look at do we think too much alike here?
Exactly. Another thing I think that has come about with organizations hiring people out of their own localities with the onset of people working
Oh,
virtually
yeah.
is we're hiring people from all over the country, people with different life experiences that may be unusual in terms of what we've experienced. And you take an organization that's fairly established, they've been around for a while, everyone worked locally, they all commuted, they had a consistent experience in terms of what their lives had been. And now all of a sudden, they're bringing in these people from other parts of the country. Life experiences, I think, are also a part of that diversity we're looking for in terms of surrounding ourselves with different kinds of thought processes.
I know too, and I've personally had this. there's the confirmation bias dynamic that goes on where someone challenges me on something and I'm thinking, no, I'm right. I know I'm right. So who do I go ask if I'm right? Who do I go run this by to get a second opinion on it? And I had seen a colleague of ours on LinkedIn, and this person had done something very dramatic to their appearance. And it made my first reaction was, wow, this is really unprofessional looking. And I was trying to decide, like, is this unprofessional or isn't it? So I thought, of course, I'm going to go ask somebody else and see what they think. And the first person I thought to go to, I didn't go to because I stopped for a second and thought, this person thinks just like me. I know what they're going to say. And that's why I wanted to go to that person, because I wanted them to prove me right. And so then I really challenged myself not to have confirmation bias. And I thought, okay, who's the most open type of person that I could ask this to? And I sent them a note and I'm like, I know this is the weirdest question in the world, but I need to know, what do you think of this? Is this something that you consider professional? And they wrote back and said, yeah, I do. I think it's perfectly appropriate based on this person's subject matter expertise or topic. And it really taught me a lesson about being careful not to just go ask the person who, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, a family member, a colleague. It's so tempting to just go to that person we know really well who thinks like us and ask them.
Yeah. This kind of goes back a little bit to ego trap number 1 when we talked about feedback, this confirmation bias thing. Am I going to ask someone that I know is going to support what I already believe or my values, or am I looking for something really different? So I think it relates not only to, who we surround ourselves with, but what kind of feedback am I looking for? Am I just wanting to confirm what I already think about myself? Or am I really wanting to get to the bottom of what a broader audience believes?
I'm reminded of a story of a very senior level leader, CEO in a very large company, Fortune 100 organization, very successful organization, but somewhat of a fiery, I would say, CEO as far as their style went. And I had heard a story about one of their executive team meetings and a debate that propped up from between the CEO and one of the division managers. And the CEO had said, I'm doing this or we're doing this. And the division manager had a very opposite opinion about it and challenged the CEO on it in the meeting. And this was a room of 20 people, all direct reports of the CEO. And apparently the division manager was hot enough that was, pointing fingers, yelling, you're wrong, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking. And so there were several people in the room who were a bit unnerved by the whole thing and just thought, gosh, that guy's brave to say that to the boss. And afterward, everyone calmed down, cooled off. They came to a decision that actually did change the mind of the CEO. And later, one of the people in the room approached the CEO and said, how did that go for you? How do you feel about what happened there? And he said, I loved it. I think that is the type of meeting we need every month because it tells me people care. They care about the company, they care about these decisions, and they're not afraid to speak their mind. That's the type of organization I want and I need. And I thought, wow, that's really refreshing because that's not the norm out there.
Yeah.
It was a great example, I think, of being okay not surrounding himself with more of just yes men. Or yes, women.
A great example. In a totally different context, I was talking to like a 10-year-old the other day, and
I think I know which one.
I think you're right. And I asked a question, and the response was, "Do you want to know the answer, or do you want to know what I think?" And it took me aback. And I think as it relates to this, confirmation bias thing, do I really want to know what the other person thinks? Do I really want to gain that perspective? But I went really deep at that moment. So you never know where interesting commentary is going to come from that makes you think. That's all I got to say.
You're right. You're right about that. Well, this is a big topic. I think we all have to kind of challenge ourselves to not avoid conflict and just be tempted to go along to get along. But in a nutshell, I think we can say, find the questioner in your life. If you're finding that too much is going your way, you're not getting a lot of questions back about decisions you're making, you may need to go seek somebody out who thinks differently than you.
Yes.
Be proactive about it because it may not just come to you.
Yes.
And, maybe actively avoid confirmation bias by investigating the opposite side. I have tried to make it a habit when I listen to certain podcasts, especially political podcasts, to listen to the other podcast out there that's the exact opposite side. So I can kind of hear both sides of what's going on and not just create an echo chamber for myself of one opinion or one viewpoint.
Right. I think there's a great opportunity for us to become more authentic to ourselves and others by broadening our willingness to listen to other versions of what we might think is true.
Absolutely.
And keeping in mind also that diversity does include culture and ethnicity, but it also includes personality type, communication style, gender, all those things that make us all unique and different.
Yeah. So if you're somebody in a hiring role, really resist that temptation to hire for fit and instead maybe hire for EQ.
This sounds like a topic that we could spend a lot of time talking about in a future broadcast.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Steve and Angela. This was a great subject and one I hope to bring up again in the future podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.